Snow fell in quiet sheets over the northern valley as Ian stepped out of the carriage. The air was sharp, the kind that cut through cloth and bone. Ahead of him stood the winter house, a wide stone fortress built before any written records of the kingdom. Long banners hung still against the windless sky, stained by age rather than color. Before we delve into these overlooked tales of endurance and pain, if you find yourself drawn to the hidden corners of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I am always amazed that we can explore these ancient narratives together, no matter where we are in the world, united by our curiosity about the past. Ian had been summoned to this place by order of the High Council. He was not a noble, not a warrior, not even someone the world would call important. He had been a teacher in a city school, someone who believed in order, reason, and hope. But a year ago, everything had changed. The kingdom had fallen into a quiet but deadly struggle between families of power. There were no open wars, no public executions. Instead, whispers spread, alliances broke, and ordinary people found themselves pulled into battles they never chose. Ian was one of them. He had spoken one sentence in a public meeting, only one line criticizing the council's decisions. That was all it took. The next morning, 2 riders came for him and took him north. And now he stood before the winter house, waiting for the doors to open. The great gates creaked, heavy with frost. A tall guard in thick leather stepped out. "You're the teacher," he said. Ian nodded, unsure if the man meant it as an insult. "Follow me. They want to see how strong your mind is." Ian wanted to ask who they were, but he bit back the question. The winter house had a reputation. It was not a prison, not exactly. It was a place where people of talent were brought when the council wanted something from them. No one knew exactly what happened inside the stone walls, only that those who left were never quite the same. He followed the guard inside, steps echoing through the long corridor. The air smelled of smoke, metal, and cold earth. He felt as though the walls themselves were watching him. A woman waited in a small room at the end of the hall. She was dressed in simple dark robes lined with silver thread. Her hair was tied back, and her expression was calm but unreadable. "I am Marwa," she said. "The council has asked me to study you." "Study me?" Ian asked, confused. "Yes," she said, as if it were obvious. "We study minds here. Some are useful. Some are dangerous. Sometimes they are both." She motioned for him to sit. A candle burned beside her, its flame steady even though Ian could feel a draft. "You were a teacher," she began. "A historian, to be precise." "Yes, and you questioned the council's use of emergency powers." "I questioned their silence," he corrected softly. "People were disappearing. There were rumors." Marwa stared at him for a long moment. There was no hostility in her expression, yet Ian felt as if she could see through him. "You believe you were brought here as punishment," she said. "Wasn't I?" "No," she replied. "You were brought here because you are honest, and honest people are rare. They can be valuable." Ian frowned. "Valuable for what?" "That," she said, "depends on how well you survive this place." Her words hung between them, steady as cold metal. He didn't know if she was warning him or challenging him. Days turned into weeks, and the winter house revealed itself slowly. Ian learned that the fortress had been built during the era of the first kings. For centuries, it had been used to study unusual minds, scholars, strategists, prophets, rebels. Some arrived by force. Others came by choice, drawn by the promise of knowledge and power. The Hall of Silence was one of the strangest rooms. It was a long chamber with walls carved from black stone. The ceiling arched high above, disappearing into darkness. No sound echoed inside the hall. Every footstep, Every breath seemed to dissolve instantly. When Ian spoke, his voice felt trapped in his throat. Marwa explained that the stone had been cut using ancient techniques. The hall was designed so that a person could hear only their thoughts. Many lost themselves in that room. Ian understood why they brought him there. The council wanted to know if he could keep his mind steady when everything familiar was stripped away. He walked through the hall every morning. Sometimes Marwa watched him quietly from the entrance. She rarely spoke during these sessions. One day, after an hour in the hall, Ian came out pale and trembling. He leaned against the wall, his breath unsteady. Marwa stepped closer. "What did you hear today?" "Nothing," Ian whispered. "That's the problem. When there's no sound, your mind tries to fill the emptiness. I heard things that weren't real." "What things?" He hesitated. "My own fears, my regrets, a future that scared me." She studied him for a moment. "Good. You are not running from yourself. That is important." "Why?" "Because people who run from themselves are the easiest to control." After the Hall of Silence came the trials of memory. These were not physical tests. They were puzzles, stories, and questions designed to pull apart a person's beliefs. Marwa would sit across from him, placing objects on the table. A broken compass, a burnt letter, a cracked mirror. Each item came with a scenario. "You find this near your home," she would say. "What does it tell you?" Ian had to analyze, infer, guess. But that was the simple part. The real trial came later. Days after the scenario, Marwa would ask him what he had remembered. Sometimes she changed the details on purpose. Sometimes she insisted he had said things he never said. The room was warm, the fire gentle, but the questions were sharp enough to wound. "You remember the compass pointing west, yes?" she said one night. "No," Ian replied calmly. "It pointed south." She smiled faintly. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "Even though the letter mentioned a settlement west of the marsh?" "Yes." "You are willing to contradict the evidence?" "I am willing to trust my memory when I know it's strong," he said. Marwa leaned back, observing him with something like approval. "We test memories here," she said. "Not to break them, but to understand their limits. A leader who doubts everything becomes weak. A leader who questions nothing becomes dangerous. The council wants people who know the difference." Ian shook his head. "I don't want to be a leader." Everyone becomes a leader when the world gives them no choice. He didn't know whether she meant that as hope or warning. Not everyone in the winter house treated Ian with interest or respect. Some saw him as an outsider who did not deserve to be there. One evening, as he walked back to his room, two men blocked his path. They were dressed as researchers, not guards. Their expressions were lazy, but their eyes alert. "You're the new one," the taller man said. "The teacher." Ian nodded. "We hear Marwa spends a lot of time on you," the other man said, voice edged with jealousy. "You must be special." "I'm not," Ian said simply. "She's doing her job." The tall man stepped closer. "If you think you can take the best mentor here without consequences, you're mistaken." Ian tried to walk around them, but they moved at the same time. "You don't belong here," the second man said. "People like you make the rest of us look weak." Ian felt his throat tighten. He wasn't trained for this kind of confrontation. Before things could escalate, a light voice rose from down the hall. "Is there a problem?" Marwa stood in the shadows, her expression unreadable. The two men stiffened. "No problem," they muttered before walking away. Marwa watched them disappear, then turned to Ian. "This place is full of ambition," she said. "Not everyone handles it well." "You mean jealousy?" "That too," she admitted. "Some think the council's attention is a prize. Others fear losing it." "And you?" Ian asked. What do you think of all this? Her eyes softened, just a little. I think the council chooses candidates based on potential, she said. And potential can be dangerous. Stirs envy, suspicion, fear. You will have to learn how to navigate that. I sighed. I didn't ask for any of this. No one does, she said quietly. That's why it matters. Winter deepened. Snow covered the walls, and wind howled like a living creature. The winter house became a maze of flickering torches, cold breaths, and hurried footsteps. Rumors spread through the halls. Some said the council was preparing for a purge. Others whispered that a rebellion in the east was growing stronger. One morning, Marwa entered Ayan's study looking more tense than usual. The council wants your analysis, she said. There is a document you must read. She handed him a leather folder filled with letters, maps, and intercepts. They described a secret movement rising within the kingdom, people gathering quietly, forming cells, storing supplies. Ayan felt a chill even though the fire burned brightly behind him. These people, he said slowly, they're afraid. They think the council is losing control. Marwa nodded. The council thinks you can predict what they'll do next. Why me? Because you understand how fear turns into action. You've seen it. You've lived it. Ayan studied the papers again. The rebels had no clear leader, no formal structure, and yet they grew. They're not driven by ambition, Ayan said. They're driven by survival. That makes them unpredictable. Marwa watched him carefully. Can the council trust your analysis? He looked up. I won't lie for them, not even now. She didn't look surprised. Good. They don't want lies. They want clarity. Ayan wasn't sure he believed that, but he wrote the report anyway. A week later, everything changed. A messenger arrived in the middle of the night. The council demanded a meeting with Marwa at once. She left without explanation. The next morning, the fortress felt different. Guards walked faster. Researchers whispered in corners. Even the torches seemed dimmer. Then the alarm bell rang. Ayan ran to the main hall where others had gathered. The head guard made the announcement. A rebellion force has reached the outer valley, he said. We are preparing for lockdown. Gasps echoed around the room. Ayan felt his heart pound. They came here. The guard nodded. They want the winter house. They think we hold political prisoners. They think freeing them will weaken the council. Ayan swallowed hard. Will it? The guard didn't answer. All day, the fortress shook with distant explosions. Smoke rose across the snow. The rebels were not as unorganized as the council believed. Marwa returned that evening. Her robe was torn at the hem, her face pale. What happened? Ayan asked. The council wanted me to stay in the capital, she said. But I refused. I belong here. Ayan hesitated. You came back because of your work? Her eyes softened. I came back because you're here, and because I trust you more than anyone in that chamber. Those simple words hit him harder than he expected. For 3 days, the winter house endured the siege. Food was rationed. Fires burned low. The walls trembled under the rebels' assault. Ayan helped where he could, carrying supplies, reading coded messages, giving calm advice to people who were close to breaking. He saw things he never imagined. Fear turning into courage, old grudges melting away, people working together not out of loyalty but necessity. On the 4th day, the rebels broke through the outer gate. Panic spread quickly. Some residents hid. Some tried to flee. A few prepared to fight even though they had never held weapons before. Marwa found Ayan in the library, gathering maps. You're not running? She asked. I won't survive out there, he said. So I might as well help. She smiled faintly. I knew you would say that. Together, They ran to the command room where the guards tried to hold the last line. Ian looked at the maps. The rebels had surrounded the fortress, but their formation had a blind spot near the eastern ridge. "Send a small team through this path," he said, pointing. "It's risky, but it will let us negotiate." "Negotiate?" the head guard asked. "They want to burn this place down." "Then give them something better," Ian said. "Give them proof that the winter house isn't what they think it is. Show them we're not the enemy." The guard hesitated. Then he nodded. A small team left. Hours passed. The fortress waited in tense silence. Then at dawn, horns sounded outside. The rebels were retreating. Ian let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Marwa touched his shoulder. "You saved everyone." "No," he said softly. "Fear saved us. And hope. Both can move people in ways nothing else can." The siege ended, but the kingdom was changed. The council arrived 2 days later. They brought doctors, builders, scholars. They inspected the damage, asked questions, praised the survivors. Ian expected to be ignored. Instead, they asked for him by name. "You helped prevent a massacre," one council member said. "We owe you." Ian stood quietly. "I didn't do it for you." The counselor smiled thinly. "That's why we want you. People who act from conscience are harder to predict, but they are also harder to corrupt." Ian glanced at Marwa, who gave him a small nod. The council continued. "We want you to join our advisory circle, not as a servant, as a voice of truth." Ian considered the offer, felt heavy, like a weight placed on his chest. "Will I be free to speak honestly?" he asked. "Yes. And if I criticize you, you already have," the counselor said. "And yet you stand here." Ian closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of everything he had endured. The hall of silence, the trials of memory, the fear, the doubts, the siege. Then he opened his eyes. "I accept." Winter slowly loosened its grip. Snow melted, revealing patches of earth. Birds returned in cautious pairs. Before leaving, Ian walked through the fortress one last time. He touched the cold walls of the Hall of Silence. He closed the door of the study where he had faced his fears. He looked out at the eastern ridge where hope had slipped through the smoke. Marwa joined him near the gate. "You're leaving," she said softly. "And you're staying," he replied. She nodded. "The winter house needs someone who understands people, someone who doesn't fear the truth. And the council needs someone who won't lie to them." They stood quietly for a moment. Ian finally said, "I was afraid when I arrived here. I thought this place would break me." "But it didn't," Marwa said. "It changed you. Did it make me stronger?" "It made you real," she said. "Strong comes later." He smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. "You taught me more than any school ever did," he told her. "And you reminded me why I chose this work," she replied. They parted without grand speeches, without promises, without dramatic goodbyes. Just two people who survived something rare and difficult, and who would carry its lessons into very different futures. Ian rode south with the council's envoy. The road was long, but the air warmer. The landscape shifted from white to brown to green. As the capital's towers rose in the distance, Ian felt a quiet certainty. He was not returning as the teacher who had been taken away. He was returning as someone who understood the cost of truth, the weight of power, and the shape of fear. The council wanted his mind. The people would want his courage. And he wanted something simple, a chance to help his kingdom step away from the shadows. The winter house stayed behind him, but its lessons walked beside him. And his story, was only beginning.